Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. In this video, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get our character to jump. And before we get started, I just want to go ahead and put it out there that the animations within the Anim Starter Pack are really awful for jumping. And to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily include them in any kind of end product because they just really aren't good for gameplay jumping. They're only really something I would use for like a scripted event or for maybe having an interactable something in the environment where the character will automatically jump for the player. I wouldn't necessarily have this as a jumping mechanic for the player because the animations really are that bad and they don't work that well. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how the jump mechanic works anyway and how simple it is to get a character to really jump. So in order to get started, we're going to have to do what we've always done and create an input so the player can tell the game that he wants his character to jump. So as always, we're going to go into our project settings and we're going to go to our inputs and we're going to add a new action mapping. And I'm just going to call this input or this action mapping the jump button. And I'm going to add a second input, one for the keyboard and one for the controller. And for the first one, I'm just going to make it the standard space bar. And for the controller, I'm going to search for the we'll search for the face button. And I'm going to make it the top button, which is a Y on an Xbox controller or a triangle on the PlayStation controller. So that's going to complete setting up our buttons. So we can go ahead and close out of our project settings. And I'm going to open up the blueprint for our player character. So inside of our player character, we just have to go ahead and search for the event for our input. So I'm just going to search for the jump button. I'm going to place it over here off to the side. And from pressed, we basically just want to cause the character to jump. And there's a jump function that is automatically built into the character movement component. So if we drag out from pressed and just search for jump, there's a function in here that is simply called jump. And really that's all there is to getting the player to jump. You just have to end up calling the function within the character movement and it will go ahead and provide a upward force on the character that will get it to jump. So as always, we can test it out by compiling and saving and hitting play. And if we hit the space bar, the character jumps up in the air, and he's playing his movement animation because we haven't set up animation for the jumping yet. But we're going to get to that shortly, but you'll see that the character actually jumps up into the air. And if I have my controller, I'll hit the Y button, and he jumps up as well. So I'm going to exit out of there. And in order to find out if our character is jumping, you can actually go ahead and right-click in the graph and search for is falling. And when the character leaves the surface of the ground, it will go ahead and track whether or not the character is in a falling state at any point, which includes upward movement, just basically that there isn't a surface directly underneath the character that the character is standing on. So this function will return true if the character has nothing directly below him and false when he is standing on top of something. So we don't need that in our graph right here. I'm just going to go ahead and put a comment box around this, and we'll just call it the jump button. And at this point, we can go ahead and compile and save and move over to our Anim blueprint. So in our Anim graph here, we want to be in the event graph first because we want to find out if we're falling and set it to a variable. So in order to do that, I'm going to drag off from our try get pawn owner here. I'm going to move our cast and everything off to the side here because we don't actually need the cast to the player character for this to work. So I'm going to add in another reroute node in this line I have drawn at the bottom here. You just have to drag off of the try get pawn owner. And I'm going to drag out and we're going to search for get movement component. And this is going to return a reference to the movement component within a pawn or a character. And we're going to drag off from the return value, and we're going to search for that is falling. And you're going to see the function is falling, and it'll return that Boolean for us. So we can go ahead and drag out and promote to a variable. And I'm just going to call this variable is falling. And then I'm just going to go ahead and chuck it in line here with the rest of the class, or the rest of our code here in between when we set the direction and when we cast. And I'm going to just reorganize a little bit. So right after we set our direction, we go ahead and set is falling, and we get that from the movement component of the pawn or the character. And now we have a way to track whether or not the player is falling. So we're going to go back into the animation state here, and we're going to have to go ahead and add the jump animations. So in our asset browser, I'm going to search for jump, and there's 3 animations in here. There's a jump from jog, a jump from stand, and a jump from stand iron sight. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up one of these animations here to show you why this is really an awful animation. And as you can see here, it's just a cycle of the character jumping, and it's a complete animation. And it's kind of like he's just skipping over something or jumping over something. Now, for in-gameplay, this is really bad because the animation just plays this animation. And if the character starts falling and it plays this animation over and over, it's going to look like crap, really. It's not going to look very good. So this is going to put limitations on the mechanics of our jump in order to make the animation kind of look good in game. But overall, like I said, these are really bad animations, and this is more or less to show you how to create a jump mechanic. In an ideal situation, you would have 3 animations for each type of jump. You would have a jump start. So this would be where the character thrusts himself up into the air. Then you would have a falling animation. So while the character is in the air, the animation that he would play. And then you would have a landing animation. And the start and the end should be really short animations. But here we have an animation that's a single animation that's over 3/4 of a second for the entirety of the animation. And I've tried playing around with this animation and breaking it up to see if I can make it work in a gameplay scenario. And really, I haven't found anything that works yet. So right now, we're just kind of stuck with this and dealing with that the jump isn't going to be very much of a jump. And honestly, I would kind of exclude this from actual gameplay. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this animation here. And I'm going to drag in the jump from jog. And I'm going to call this the jump. Or we'll stick with our same naming convention down below. So I'm going to call it walking_jump. And then I'm going to drag out the jump from stand animation. And I'm going to call this our idle_jump. So one animation will be played when we're standing still, and one animation will be played when we're moving. So we're going to have to set up some transition rules here. So from idle standing to idle jump, I'm going to go ahead and set a transition rule both ways. And to move from idle standing to idle jump, I'm going to open up that transition, and we're going to get the is falling, and we're just going to go ahead and plug that into our result. And that's really all we need to know. So when the character leaves the surface, we can go ahead and play the animation. And I'm going to go back, and we have to handle that transition from idle jump to idle standing. So we want to do this when is falling is not true. So I'm going to get our is falling variable. We're going to search for a not Boolean. And then we're going to go ahead and plug this result into the can enter transition. But this may not be all we need in order to transition back. The other thing we want to take into account is the time that the animation plays. So we want to make sure that the animation isn't cycling over and over again. So I'm going to right click in the graph here, and I'm going to search for time remaining. And there's going to be one option for time remaining, jump from stand. And it's going to have the name of the animation that we're transitioning from in. And this is going to return a value in a float that's going to tell us how much time is left in that animation before it completes one playthrough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag off of here. I'm going to search for a less than. And we're going to put in, I'm just going to put in 0.1. And then I'm going to drag off from there and search for an OR Boolean. And I'm going to connect both of these conditions up to our result. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to say in the event that the time on the animation that's playing, if it's less than 0.1 seconds, we're going to transition. Or if we're not falling anymore, we're going to transition as well. So that's going to make sure that in either one of these cases that, yes, we go ahead and transition back to the other state. So we can go ahead and go back to our state machine. And then we can do the same exact thing for our walking, standing to walking jump. So I'm going to drag out two transition rules back and forth. And from walking, standing to walking jump, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to get is falling and plug it into our result. And then for the transition from walking jump back to walking standing, we're going to have to get time remaining. And let's try that again. It's search for a time remaining and select the one from the jump from jog. We're going to check this one to see if it's less than. And we'll set the value to 0.1. And we'll drag out and create an OR Boolean. And then once again, we want to also check to see if is falling is false. And we'll plug that into our OR, and our OR can go into our result. So in this case, if the jump from jog animation has less than 0.1 seconds left on it, or is falling is not true, we're going to transition back to the previous state. Now there's going to be one more transition rule that I want to go ahead and make, and that's from the sprinting state. And in this case, I'm just going to make one transition from sprinting to walking jump. We don't have to make a return back to sprinting because when the character stops jumping and we're still sprinting, it's going to immediately make the transition from walking standing over to sprinting again. So from the sprinting to walking jump, we're going to go ahead and get is falling and plug that directly into our result. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. And at this point, we can go ahead and test it. And this is going to reveal exactly how bad these animations really are for this. It really isn't good. So we're going to see that firsthand. So if we jump in place, you'll notice that the jumping animation is a little bit delayed on there because the whole jumping action within the animation is so long that, yeah, it really doesn't look good at all. And if you want a good example of how to set up jumping animations, I would take a look at the third-person template. There's actually 3 separate animations in there, and that's a much better way to jump. But we're kind of stuck with these animations, and those animations in the third-person template don't have him holding a rifle, so it kind of doesn't work for us, and you can kind of jerry-rig something to work. But I'm going to keep it simple for right now, and we're really not going to get into jumping and melding multiple animations together just yet. So let's go ahead and test it out when he's moving. So if we're running, we can go ahead and jump as well. And you're going to notice that the animation plays a little longer than the time that the character is in the air. So we're going to have to play with the jump mechanics a little bit to get it to match up. But we can see at this point when we're jumping, he goes ahead and plays that animation. And then if we sprint and jump, he goes ahead and plays the animation for jumping as well. So that's going to complete everything we need to do in our animation blueprint here. So I'm just going to go ahead and compile and save this and close it. And we're going to have to look at the character movement component for our player character. So I'm just going to select the character movement component, and in the details tab, I'm going to search for jump. And we're going to get several options that we can use for jumping and falling. By default, in the bottom, can jump should be checked to true. So if you're having problems with the character not being able to jump, you're going to want to make sure that that can jump checkbox is checked. But the thing we're really going to want to pay attention to is the jump Z velocity at the top here. It's by default set to 420. I'm going to set this to 325. I played around with the animation a lot, and this is kind of one of the better looking jump velocities that will line up with the animation properly. So it kind of looks good at this. It still doesn't look great, but once again, we're kind of limited on what we can do with these animations. So either we just have to kind of deal with it or get rid of the jumping functionality. Personally, I just wouldn't use the jumping functionality in this instance. There are a couple other neat options in there that we can use. For example, there's air control, which by default is set to 0.05. And this is a value between 0 and 1. And this determines how much input is added to the character movement when the character is falling. So right now, if you're falling and you're holding like a move forward button or a move backwards button, it's only going to modify the movement by 5%. There's also an option in here for falling lateral friction here, which will basically, as the character falls, it'll slow the movement left and right. So unless you're holding a movement key, it's going to basically, if you're like jumping forward, as you jump forward while you're in the air, the character would slow down. So these are a couple of options that you can play with and test out and see what you like. But we have the jump Z velocity set, so I'm going to go ahead and test this out. And if we go ahead and jump, he only plays the animation once, so the timing for this jump times up pretty well. Same thing if he's in standing position. But once again, the animation for the standing jump takes so long to spool up that it doesn't really look very good. And if we jump while sprinting, it looks pretty good. Now, the other thing to note too is falling will also apply if the character falls off a ledge. So if I go ahead and take the character and fall off the ledge here, you're going to notice that he's just playing the jumping animation over and over again. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. And yet another reason why this specific animation is really bad, because this doesn't look good at all. But that's how the jump mechanic works. So if you guys have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and leave them down below. I'm also going to leave a link to my Facebook page so you can check it out and like me over there and see what's going on. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.